A recent study by the University of New South Wales shows Australia among the many hotspots for so-called forever chemicals. The substances officially known as PFAs has earned the name because they don't degrade once they're in the environment. They're also linked to health issues, including some cancers. The study notes that Australia's limits are much higher than those of the US and Canada. The New South Wales State Parliament has announced a wide-ranging inquiry into the health risks of these chemicals. Health officials also say they're assessing testing protocols for drinking water in the state. Let's bring our next guest. With us now is Marianne Lloyd-Smith, who's a senior advisor at the International Pollution Elimination Network, which comprises more than 600 NGOs working in more than 120 countries. Marianne, really great to have you with us. And it's a particularly shocking development because, of course, Australia is well known for its lifestyle, for its environment, for, clean waters. And in particular, when you take a look at a region like the Blue Mountains, where so many people choose to live because of those positive factors. But it doesn't sound like it's surprising to you, because you say there's been policy inaction, or at least an inadequate response for a number of years now.
That's certainly the case, yes, because in 2011 we knew that about 50% of our regional and city water providers were producing water that was contaminated. So it was no surprise. Unfortunately, nothing was done for the next 13 years, and here we are, looking at the problem right across Australia with contamination at significant levels and levels that have really got the community concerned.
What should the immediate policy response be, given the level of risks that we're talking about?
Well, certainly we could stop arguing about the level of risk and what level is acceptable, because the US EPA has come out quite clearly and said there is no safe level of exposure. So the whole aim should be reduce our exposure to as close to zero as possible. To do that, there are some sensible, things that the government could ensure. Substantially improving water treatment at the point of distribution, making sure that all the water providers use the best available technology, reverse osmosis, microfiltration, that sort of thing. We could stop the release and distribution of contaminated biosolids. That's the byproduct of our wastewater treatment plant. We produce 500,000 tonnes of these biosolids, much of which is contaminated and the majority of which is used on agricultural land. We need to get PFAS out of food packaging, out of pesticides, out of pesticide containers. We need to look at PFAS in imported products and really focus on personal products and children's products. And we need to increase our environmental monitoring. But really importantly, the government must initiate a claim against 3M, the producer of many of the PFAS chemicals, to pay for all of this. This cannot be a thing that the community, who is not complicit in this contamination, is meant to pay for. We need the polluters to pay as required by international good chemical management.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the international landscape. How does the regulatory background in Australia compare to other nations, and do we need more global standards?
We certainly need more global standards, and we need Australia to adhere to those global standards. Australia, unlike 100 or so other countries, has not ratified the global ban on PFOS, PFOA and PFH excess, which has been required by the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. We haven't ratified those. That we must do immediately. Australia's standards for drinking water are woefully inadequate, whereas the USA is talking about 4 parts per trillion as acceptable, because that's about as low as we can test for. Australia is having it up at 560 for PFOA. That's the acceptable level in Australia for PFOA in drinking water. That is just inconceivable for someone like myself, who's been working on this for, 14, 15 years. Why are we so behind? We're not sure, but certainly we're calling for the immediate upgrading of Australia's standards, because they are not acceptable. We need so much more monitoring. So little monitoring has been done in Australia. Hence why regulatory bodies were sort of shocked when that study came out this year. People like, oh, we weren't shocked, but the regulatory bodies were. And that's because they are not doing enough monitoring and they're not getting that information out to the community. So there's a lot of things in the policy area we can do, but there's also a lot of good practical activities that could help protect the Australian population. And I would also say help protect those that buy our produce. Because, you know, when you're using biosolids that are contaminated on agricultural lands, well, it does ask the question how much of that contamination is getting through to the produce and how much is getting through to the consumer who eats that produce.
Marianne, we now have inquiries both at a parliamentary, a federal level, as well as at a state level. What do you want to see in terms of deliverables and the way that these inquiries and commissions might take effect?
I hate to be negative about this, but having sat through already 3 major inquiries into PFAS, I'm sorry, I personally think the time of inquiries has come to an end. We had some good recommendations from the other inquiries. An inquiry is good if it leads to action. So if these inquiries lead to changes in our appallingly lax standards, if they lead to activity by government and water providers, if they lead to the population in Australia being much more aware and ready to take legal action to force activity, then an inquiry is worthwhile. But, you know, these will be the 4th and 5th. We've got one at a federal level, we've got one at a state level. You know, how many more inquiries do we need to see the obvious thing that these chemicals are unmanageable, they are chemicals that cause horrendous health effects, and most importantly, they are transgenerational. They affect, as a woman, we gave our first loads of residue to our firstborn. And by doing that, we pass on that contamination to generation after generation. We need action, not more discussion, not more argument about what level is acceptable. No level is acceptable.